Hello, this is Cindy Liu, and I'm with CHRO Partners. And today we are joined by a fantastic panel to talk about the CEO CHRO relationship. So, insider secrets, and we have a dynamic duo who will share that with us. And we're joined with our good friend Susan Madonia with ECC, now Ariel, and she's going to maybe just bring everybody up to date on that, and then introduce our two panelists.
Yeah, terrific. I'm so glad everybody's with us today. I think we have a fascinating topic. At least it's fascinating to me and has been my whole career long. I find the topic really interesting since post-pandemic, most organizational successes is really hinging more and more on the people strategy of that organization. And as I was kind of thinking about the topic as well, I bumped into a data point that I thought all of you might be interested in. It's from Gartner, a study in 2022. And basically they asked chief human resource officers, do you have a high degree of trust with your CEO and vice versa? And the good news is 50% said, yes, I really have. I agree strongly that I have high trust with my CEO and vice versa. Kind of the concern also is 50% had lower trust level. And, thinking about where we are post-pandemic and talent issues and how important HR is to an organization's success, I think this topic is incredibly timely. I happen to think any kind of relationship, whether it's personal, business, the foundation is trust. And we're going to get into some fascinating questions that Cindy will ask our panel, David and Karen. Both are executive partners with ECC and Ariel. And what I'd like to do is just hand off to both of them, have them introduce themselves. And then Cindy's going to really ask some probing questions about that relationship between a CEO and a chief human resource officer. So we'll get right into it. Karen, I'm going to hand it off to you if you can give a brief introduction, and then we'll have David and have Cindy jump in. Thank you.
Sure. I'm happy to start, and thank you for having us. I think that relationship really makes or breaks both the CEO and the CHRO. And so I'm excited to talk about it. My career was split into two equal parts. The first part was a finance career, 10 years at Price Waterhouse. Then I was at Baxter Healthcare in finance roles, head of internal audit, international controller, division controller. And then I was asked to do a one-year assignment in HR. And I never looked back. I ended up like 4 or 5 years later, the head of HR at Baxter. And then I left Baxter and was the head of HR for Kraft Foods for 12 years. Kraft Foods then became Mondelez when we spun out our US business. And so I had a real long run there of really helping to partner to transform the business. I left full-time work about 3 or 4 years ago, and professionally now I do two things. I coach and mentor and partner with other C-suite executives who are making the transition, CEOs and CHROs mostly, as they journey into the role. And I sit on 2 public company boards and 1 nonprofit board.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. I'm Dave Powell. And again, Cindy, thank you for having us. I have fulfilled the roles of CEO and president in a number of different organizations. I spent roughly 2/3 of my career in large, complex multinationals, including Johnson & Johnson, Avon, and American Hospital Supply, which became Baxter. I spent the other third in either startup or early stage companies. I've been a company leader, CEO, president for almost half my career, including leading companies for 2 years in Greater China and over 4 years in Japan, both locations where my family and I were based. In one role, I had responsibility for 19,000 supply chain members and operations associates that we had 10 manufacturing facilities in 9 different countries and distribution centers. We delivered roughly 130 million custom orders throughout 62 countries. So there's a lot of HR issues there, people-related issues there to deal with. And in most of my roles, there was a need for transformational change. And these changes were in areas of critical long-term business success. And they were in all areas. And throughout my career, I found that a critical partner of mine was my chief human resource officer, my HR leader. I don't feel I could have been successful at all if I had not had that partnership. So I really look forward to this discussion.
That is music to my ears. Thanks, David.
Yep.
Well, so as many of you know, our big HR event this year, the focus is on the CEO-CHRO relationship. And every year before we decide the theme, we survey our members and our community, and we say, what is top to mind for you? And for the CHROs, it's how do we bring more to the organization? And how do we do that by helping the CEO understand better or help making us better so that we can work better with the CEO? So the question I have for Karen and David is, how would you describe that ideal relationship with your CEO or CHRO? So David, do you want to start since you were on that path? Mm-hmm.
Sure. Susan mentioned trust. Trust and respect, I would put as paramount attributes for an exceptional relationship. If you don't have that, it's really hard to move forward. I see in that relationship of the executive committee, the CEOs, the team captain, if you will, and the other members are team members. But I believe in the team captain participant model. But the CHRO is a critical member of the team. The companies actually have, three sets of, three key components. You've got the human component, you've got the financial component, and then you've got the overall business component. And all those have to be managed well. So the CHRO is a critical team member. The third item I'd say is that the CHRO should have complementary strengths to the CEO. I've got major weaknesses in a lot of areas, and I've always looked to my HR leader to complement me exceptionally well in those areas of my weaknesses. And for that HR leader to be also willing to be aware of his or her weaknesses as well. So you have that complementary relationship. So those three things: trust and respect, be a critical team member that actually participates, and have complementary strengths that the CEO and CHRO can leverage and build off each other.
Okay, that's awesome. I love, obviously, the trust and respect. It's almost like you're, the person, your most trusted confidant, right?
Absolutely.
On the ELT team. I mean, beyond even probably the CFO, the CIO, it's the person that really has to be able to say to you, David, you don't have your pants on today. So
as I've told my actually anybody that works with me, but my HR leader, smack me upside the head, grab me by the shoulder, sit me down, and talk to me straight, because my CHRO has strengths that at a level that I can't even expect to achieve.
That's great. Thanks. How about you, Karen? When you were in that CHRO role?
I would build on and maybe build out this trust and respected. I think you have to be trusted as a CHRO to bring a broad business point of view to the problem. You're not there to be an employee advocate. You have to bring a shareholder, a consumer, a customer, and an employee point of view. You can't be one-dimensional, I think, or you lose that respect because you don't provide a full answer. I think the respected part runs to, are you listened to? Is the CEO really listening and taking your advice? So those are two things to watch for as you think about, I think, those two words. I'd add two other elements that were important to me. One is, I think the relationship between a CEO and a CHRO has to be business anchored. business issue anchored. It isn't just let's connect on HR topics or people topics, because we all know that culture and development and engagement happen as people work through business problems. So you need a seat at the table, whether it's an acquisition or a budget issue. There are people and communication and organizational implications to all of that. And you have to be at the table, I think, to really provide that influence. And then lastly, I think you have to create a really safe space for the CEO. I mean, you have to recognize it is a hard job. It is a lonely job. You're expected to have the answers, be in charge all the time. The world is changing rapidly. And you have to remember that human is a human. And they need a space to say, I don't know. They need a space to say, this is so frustrating to me, whether it's to vent, whether it's to just talk out loud. And when you get that relationship, the amount of influence you have then goes up exponentially, because you can reframe the issue, you can help them think through it, take the emotion out. I mean, one of the things I always had when I was a CHRO is access to the CEO calendar. So I could look ahead at their week and think, okay, right there, that's a critical conversation. I need to get ahead of that. Or I could say, okay, that's not for me, but I better follow up and circle back after that, because I want to make sure that the parties all came together in a productive way. So it's kind of that safe space and access seat at the table that really does, I think, take an average relationship to something extraordinary.
Yeah, I love that, being anchored in business. I imagine that your finance and accounting background was really helpful.
I think interestingly, it was more of a perception of helpful,
Oh,
because, to prompt open a conversation around what is the probability we're going to hit that number? You don't need to have a finance background to ask the question. I mean, I think I probably had a little more confidence in some of those areas because I was a little more familiar with it. But I think it is about having enough business acumen that you can kind of read the room and help a team have the right conversation at the right moment.
yeah. Just one quick follow-on question on the safe space. How did you get to the point where, I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, right? For the CEO just to be like, I'm going to just like share my deepest, darkest fears with you.
Right.
How did you get to that point?
Well, I think part of it is finding them and catching them at the right time. As early in your relationships, are they a morning person? Are they a night person? Do they work Sunday night when they're really starting to think through? I didn't compromise my work-life balance, but I adjusted in the beginning to kind of their rhythm and routine, so I could get in at the right time, have the right conversations, and also kind of contract up front. Look, what you tell me here doesn't go anywhere. I mean, part of that is putting that out there. But also having the confidence to say, hey, I'm not sure you're hearing what I say, and standing up for your point of view in the conversation, not to win, but to ensure that they're taking it in as they consider the options.
That's awesome. Thanks. So David, we just talked about how challenging, Karen mentioned how challenging the CEO role is. What do you think are the most significant challenges the CEO and CHRO face when they're working together?
Great question. I've had a few different situations I can think of. One is the alignment between maybe ethical business expectations and what that means between the two individuals. I did have a situation where there was a gap between those expectations, and I assumed the role to ensure that the ethical expectations of the company were achieved, and there were some cultural issues tied to it that that may have been disconnected from the company's expectations. The company maybe had higher expectations than the accepted norms of that particular region. But it's unequivocal that the alignment was necessary. And in very frank conversations with my CHRO, because we're being very honest with each other, this individual actually said, I'm not the right person for the job. And that particular challenge led to a replacement, but it was done in a way that was respectful, open, and honest, and the acknowledgement that such a change was necessary, as opposed to trying to work through the differences of perspective. So that was one situation. Another one was where my CHRO and I were very strongly aligned to those areas, but the traditional personality profile evaluations of both of us had points of conflict, which required us, and each of us ended up having executive coaches. I'm a proponent of that and have put in place executive coaching programs for my team in various companies. And we worked together through our own respective coach and working together ourselves and identifying that, hey, we are aligned on what we're trying to get done. The issue might be in the how, and in the conversation between us on the how. You get hung up on our own individual perspectives, which clouds the conversation and just takes us away from actually resolving the issue.
Right.
And we worked through that and ended up developing what I think we both acknowledged was an exceptional relationship, personal relationship, that is on the side of that personal interface, but also professional relationship. One where, as we stayed in contact as we moved on, the mutual respect and representation that we really respect this person and achieve the results. So those are two examples that I think reflect the types of challenges in a high pressure environment where the CEO and the CHRO are trying to get things done. You've got to confront these in a constructive manner. Right.
I think that's a fantastic story, especially that you guys didn't just gel right away. And, I'm this stereotype here, but, if most CEOs are driver analytics and most CHROs are feelers, right? There definitely I'm totally, I shouldn't be doing this, but I can see that would happen, and what a fantastic story that coaching really does work, right? It can help you see what your blind spots are and how to leverage each other, because as we all know, we don't want to hire somebody just like us.
Right.
And you said it earlier, you want somebody who complements your skills.
And that's what I did. I hired this individual. This individual's predecessor was highly successful and was critical to my initial success, and we moved on to greater things. And this individual I brought in, it was my hire, and we worked through it. But there were some growing pains.
It's even better. I mean, I think that gives people hope, right? Versus like, oh, you just got along, or you, like we hear a lot from CHROs to the CHROs who work for CEOs who get it. And they're like, oh, that's like nirvana, right? When you get a CEO who actually gets it. But I think a lot of people think, oh, that's just how it starts, right? Like the CEO just gets it. So you just got lucky. You got lucky. But in reality, this is a great story to highlight how it can be coached on both sides.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Next question is for both of you. I'd love for you to share a story that really highlights how your relationship and collaboration with the CEO or your CHRO helped move, the business forward in a dramatic way. David, you talked about transformations, but let's start with Karen.
Yeah. One that comes to mind, I had joined the company in the fall, and one of the first big company events that I participated in was the budget review. 3 days of a laborious presentations, tons and tons of decks, as and it went kind of like, somebody had sent out targets. The businesses all came back with numbers lower than the target. The room was silent except for the CEO and the CFO talking to the business president. And then we just went on and we ended the 3 days with a budget gap. And I watched that the first year and thought, And when we got to the next summer, the CEO and I had been working on developing the team, having the team more focused on company-wide success as opposed to their individual pillars. And I said to the CEO one time when we were traveling, hey, do you have a minute? We're heading into the budget season, and I just think maybe there's a different way of doing this. I worry that if we do it the same way we've done it before, we're going to end up backtracking on all this team stuff we've been working on. And, he kind of looked at me like, well, did you talk to the CFO? And I said, well, not yet, but I will. But I first wanted to see, are you open to thinking about this differently? And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what if we agreed that we weren't leaving the 3 days without a complete budget? What if everybody came forward and had to bring 10 pieces of paper, not 100 pieces of paper? And that everyone, after a division president presented, everyone in the room provided feedback. That would require everybody to actually listen and participate. And then when we had a budget gap, which we're going to have a budget gap, what if we put people in teams and had them come back and present ideas, and we worked through it together as a team?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, I've never seen it done that way. And I said, well, I haven't either, but this is an idea here. I mean, it can't get any worse than last year. So, he was kind of, intrigued by the idea. I said, look, I don't need a decision today. Why don't I go work with the CFO? And so from there, we kind of revamped how the session worked, how the team worked. And again, you could say, well, yeah, you have a finance background, but I didn't get involved at all in what the template looked like, what the targets looked like. All I worked on was the tone in the room and how that team came together to an outcome. It wasn't perfect the first year, mind you, but it was a step forward, and we didn't take a step backward. But there's an example where you would say, well, why is the CHRO in the middle of the budget process? Well, because it's a team process in addition to a budget process.
Right. Okay, Karen, I love that. And by the way, I remember that story from when we spoke in the past because it's a great story. And I think Ariel, right? Ariel does a lot of work with people on storytelling. And I'm like, I don't remember anything unless I write it down. I remember my notes, but I remember that story from when we spoke in the past. But I also love just the way, not to get too tactical here, but how you phrased it. I worry. What if we, yeah. Right? Just the way you phrased it, I think was very non-confrontational, but in such a consultative guidance kind of way that I was just like, of course, we should definitely try that.
I think the language you use is really important. And to keep things open, I could be wrong, but I have a thought. It allows people to, I think it allows people to speak more freely. And I feel more comfortable, instead of saying I should, using some of those techniques. Sometimes they fall flat and, they don't work, but you didn't get yourself over your skis and you didn't back anybody in a corner. So I think language is an important part of influencing.
I wish I had you as a coach when I was a CEO for a company because it's interesting culturally. I'm Chinese and it's a very direct language, right? So when I first became a general manager, I think I made a lot of people cry just because I was just so direct. I'm like, why pussyfoot around this issue? Let me just give you the feedback, right? And so then I pulled way back to the point where I was trying to use some of these words. And then the feedback I got from the board was, you don't have enough executive presence. So, I'm like, okay, I could have used you, Karen. So for all of you listening, like, I think that's, how you present and the words you use are so critical.
And I think there's a balance across a continuum. I rarely said, I don't support that. But when
Right.
I said that, that meant something because
Yeah.
I didn't say it very often. And then I could use some of this, the continuum,
Right.
for different situations.
I need to remember that with my teenager. Thank you for that. All right. So David, you talked about transformational work. And so same question, just like what was a relationship or a situation that you had, a story with a CHRO that really helped transform, move the business forward?
Well, I've got lots of them because my CHROs were always so critical to our success. One is this company that I was running had exceptionally low levels of employee engagement. We had 40% of our sales outside the US. You hear the term employee engagement, you hear the term surveys, and it's so often lip service. And my CHRO took it seriously and helped me understand what it means, how you evaluate it, what follow-up action is necessary to impart success so that the employees globally see the change and engage. And again, brought in an outside, famous outside vendor for helping us understand the data. And the CHRO was, again, strong business acumen, understood strategy, understood the human side of things far better than I think than I do, and was able to help me understand how to get employee engagement up and transform our culture. That was critical for us to have business success, because there were deficiencies we had in so many different functional areas around the world, and in particular in the US. And we made huge progress. I mean, transformational progress, except for one area, one critical area in the US. And again, I'm a data type of guy, and some of your stereotypes I might fit. And we looked at it with this consultant. We were able to identify exactly what happened. And the challenge was that particular leader reported to me of this one area didn't take it as seriously as the CHRO was saying we needed to take it, and had provided some an acceptable level of the feedback info to garner acceptance by me and the rest of the people on the team. And the revelation was in your face obvious for all of us. And so then the CHRO and myself and this other individual who led a large portion of the company's critical function had very direct, insightful discussions about what was necessary. We went through a whole new evaluation of this particular area. We identified deficiencies. The employees identified the deficiencies for us. And again, then we had this three-way discussion about what is it that you're going to do to impact this. This is not lip service. This is not checking a box. And that individual embraced it and was very successful. And in 12 months, we far exceeded our expectation and even the norm of the company. But once we got the whole company together, we were way out in front, and it transformed our ability to completely rebrand the company globally, to ensure that the different parts of the world were engaging, to have new product. I mean, it was across the board transformational success because the CHRO provided the leadership, made it clear as to what the outcome should be, that this isn't some program, and partnered with the rest of the team to drive that successful outcome. It was an event that transformed my understanding of what employee engagement is and how you impact it, and help me have that impact as my career continued to unfold.
I love watching you relive that story and the energy you got from sharing that story. And I'm so glad to hear that you're a CEO that follows the data. We do hear complaints about CEOs who get all the data, but then decide to do what they want to do anyways.
Right.
It happens. All right. So Karen, you talked a little bit about this already, but obviously it's not always a smooth sailing, right? When you're building that relationship with the CEO, there's going to be conflicts. In fact, last night we had one of our group together, and we talked about the challenges that they have with their CEOs. And one of them was just like the CEO holding the rest of the ELT accountable, right? And the CHRO sort of be in the middle of that and having a hard time doing their job. But I'm curious, do you have a story or an example that you'd be willing to share about?
Yeah, I think the clashes, because there are plenty of clashes, especially if you're the person providing the feedback. And I made the mistake early on of kind of the mistake wasn't providing the feedback, but the mistake was the team expected me only to provide the feedback. And they had to correct that really quickly. It's like, well, you go tell her, or you go tell him. And in the beginning, I would be like, excuse me, why am I doing all this? You have to, and to teach others to give the feedback.
Right.
But I found our clashes were under a broad umbrella of they wanted to do something in the short term that I didn't think served the medium and the long term.
Okay.
And, let's say it was put this person in the job, give the person the money they want, give them the title they want, whatever it is, it's a tense moment. You're on a short timeline, and they would just say, do it. And I would remember, trying to figure out how much leeway I had. And I would always start again with language. We can do anything you want, but I just want you to understand, here are 3 ramifications of going down this path. 1, everybody's going to know that title changed. 3 other people are going to want it. It's going to confuse investors. They're going to think this is a successor. So, look, we can do it, but I just want you to hear that there are ramifications. And, you could tell by their face that they understood it, but you had to then be ready with other solutions, because then they would say, okay, so what do you want to do? And, it would get snippy. And I'd say, well, you could do these other 5 things. But none of them were as good as solving the problem and just giving them the title, right? And so you had to kind of work your way through. We could do these 2 things. We could do a combination of these 3 things. I think in the long run, that would rock other boats less. And sometimes you had to learn how to pick your battles, but it was always over the just do it, Karen, versus the cleanup that was going to have to happen if we just did it.
Right. So helping them see the consequences of actions and just being really consultative.
Yeah. And then having other ideas, because, they would stop. I could always get them to stop. Right. Because usually the ramifications were pretty obvious, and they probably knew them anyway. I wasn't telling them anything. I was just putting it out in front.
They're like, we're just going to put this out there here, Karen, so you can help me think through what the real solution should be.
Yeah. So you had to have some other ideas to try to move the conversation from what this I thought was not probably the best idea to something else that could work and solve maybe not the entire issue as elegantly, but didn't create the unintended consequences that some actions can take.
Yeah. I think that word unintended consequences comes up a lot with our audience. All right. So it is Friday afternoon, and we've heard about some of the serious stories around, this relationship. And so I'm curious, David, do you actually have any funny stories or amusing moments that you had with your CHROs?
What? Not a whole lot. But I mean, there are moments where we laugh a lot and get along. But there was one event that does stand out with my CHRO. I'm a poor golfer. Never really golfed. I'm trying to take some lessons now, so I can beat my brother, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. But anyway, my CHRO was a worse golfer. And we did a team building type, shotgun type golf event for the senior leaders. And it was so pathetically poor that we did have some exceptionally funny discussions around our skill set. But because it was a team building, EC team building event, and it was golf, so it was over a period of a few hours, it lent itself to actually breaking the ice on a couple of very difficult situations that we were trying to work through between the two of us. So I think, your question about is it funny and how did it help the relationship? I mean, there are a lot of funny things, but this one actually helped the relationship. It was an icebreaker out of the office where we could actually make fun of each other's lack of skills that brought us our pride and our drive down to a level
Right.
that allowed us to work together much more effectively.
The playing field was more level, huh?
Yeah, and it's something you could talk to like a month out, 2 months out. Oh, do you remember blah, 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 blah. And it really helped.
Okay, I have just a quick silly one. I was in a turnaround situation, and my head of HR, we just hadn't really had a chance to get to know each other that well because it was so intense. It was a toxic environment, and we had to just turn the whole thing around. And we decided to have a dress up for Halloween day. And so back in the day when I traveled Monday through Friday, I only wore black suits and black shoes, flats. Like that was what I traveled in all the time. It was easier. So he comes in with a wig on and a black suit and flats. And then I have this dark spot. I have makeup on so you can't see it. And the Zoom filter helps, but I have this dark spot and he's got this dark spot on his cheek. And I'm like, who are you supposed to be? He's like, I'm you.
That's a good one.
And that just like instantly, like, I'm seeing a whole different side of you, Mr. HR. It was perfect. Anyways, you're right. It's you do have to, right? And Karen, like you said, they're human too, right? And so, I mean, I guess I could have taken that really wrong, but I guess he figured I had a sense of humor. So, but yeah, it's fun. All right, I've lost track of my next question. Karen, I'm curious if you either from a board position, I know you're on some boards now, or if you were interviewing with a CEO for a CHRO position, what kind of attributes in today's world do you really think a CEO should be considering for a CHRO? The business acumen part obviously is like kind of table stakes, right? Like you've got to have that. Right. But what are some other things that, especially in the last couple of years, you've seen really important?
In a CEO?
CHRO.
CHRO, yeah.
Oh, wait. Yeah, I like both of them,
Yeah,
right?
Right. I think to your point, the CHRO has to be a business leader first.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to know the P&L in and out or know how to do credit financing or any of that, but you just have to understand the dynamics and speak through the dynamics and what those, how the work of HR will advance, will advance the business outcomes and making those connections. I think have you speak a totally different language. So we've talked a little bit about that. I also think a CHRO needs to now connect with a different strata of work. Most of the board and C-suite grew up a certain way. We were in the office, we were face to face, we worked in a certain way. And I think work is rapidly changing, and that's obvious. But I see many CEOs and CHR, especially CEOs, acknowledging that things are changing, remote work, flexibility, living other places, but they don't like it. And they really don't like it, and they don't like it, and it shows. Even though they're saying one thing, their emotion says something else. And so I think a CHRO really has to figure out how to connect with and invest in that, being able to understand that and find joint solutions to how a new workforce is going to be productive and build the relationships and don't lose the culture and get that spontaneity at the same time, build flexibility and new ways of working. And I find I don't have as much of that as I think CHROs of the future need to have, because I didn't live through that as a CHRO. I lived through COVID as a board member.
Mhm.
And I think many CEOs are have a blind spot there. And I think it's going to be very important to develop that skill, that voice, those compromises that are more of a win-win as opposed to the old way or the new way.
Yeah, absolutely. So those influence skills to
Yeah.
help the CEO see the blind spots, I think that is, you're right, is one of the most important skills, influence.
And for a CHRO to spend time with millennials and others who are embracing a different way of work and making sure he or she really can bring that point of view. Many of them say, well, my kids, well, you got to have a point of view beyond your 3 children or your 2 children as to what's happening in the workforce. So I think that is something that I'm coaching my CHROs to spend time now in that, with that level of workforce,
Mhm.
really understanding what's motivating them, really connecting with them so that they can figure out the win-win there.
Yeah, yeah. Going down and shaking hands at the town hall, right? And
It's not going to get it. Mm-mm.
yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, Dave, what about you? If you were hiring a CHRO today, and maybe this is different, maybe it's the same, for or you're the CEO and you're hiring a CHRO, what are the maybe 3 things that you'd look for in a candidate?
I agree with Karen. This business acumen is key. The CHROs, in order to be the partner, they've got to have a deep understanding of what drives business success, not just dollars and cents. You need to understand the key stakeholders, the board, the investors, the customers, your associates throughout the world, and the cultural differences. I know in the US, we talk about millennials, you talk about Gen X, Z, Y, and the CHRO business acumen needs to go far beyond that. I mean, you've got to think globally. So business acumen is a critical component. Strategic thinking is a second. The CHRO that I would be hiring would have to show that he or she has the ability to be a business visionary, as well as creating and executing strategies. One of the things I've seen so many times, it's like, standard, that the CEOs and CHROs, actually all EC members, often look myopically at the next 12 months. To have an impact on culture and on your whole human resource dynamic, the skill sets you need, those are years in advance. And if you're CHRO, your CHRO to be effective needs to have that vision.
Mhm.
They need to be able to bring to the table the understanding that human evolution and skill set acquisition is not like this, and it's almost never in 12 months. And so that whole strategic thinking, the business visionary is another component. So business acumen, strategic thinking.
Right.
And the third is understanding what drives individual and organizational success. And again, you get into the generational thing. But honestly, in today's world, even in the United States, you have rural, you have agricultural area, you've got the big cities, you've got people from overseas, you have a business that's big in India or China or Africa or the Middle East, Russia, Europe. You've got your CHRO needs to understand what drives individual and organizational success. And if, depending upon the type of business, that's more than just, what's in the newspaper, the headline today.
Absolutely.
So those 3 things.
Yeah. I think the one that really struck me was the business visionary, and who has a better preview of, of the entire organization and what's going on externally too. Awesome.
Yeah. And so often, and I don't know why, I think, Karen, I'm very impressed with your experience and your outspokenness. It is not uncommon to see a CHRO, what I would call self-impose a secondary position.
Yeah,
And the
right.
types of things I've talked about are the fundamental, critical success factors for business growth or transformation.
Yeah.
And that CHRO needs to be able to speak up and talk about these types of critical, important things for the company.
That's great. Karen, did you have a comment on
Yeah,
that?
can I build on that? Because I think, if I was 5 years or 10 years or 15 years ago as a CHRO and you said that, I would have self-doubt. I'm not a strategist. I don't have an MBA. I don't have a P&L. I think when you hear words that you said, you lean back. I think maybe a way for a CHRO to think about it is you don't necessarily have to know what channel you want to get into or what R&D project, but you do have to be very involved in the how it's going to get done. And I think some of the problems with strategic planning is we spend 90% on the what, and then at the end there's a slide on the how. And the how is actually more important than the what, and the how is all about the CHRO. It is, to your point, David, it's the capabilities, it's the organization, it's the barriers, it's the timeline. So I think if a CHRO started to think, maybe I'm not going to drive the business strategy, the what part, but I am going to lead the how conversation, would get them more comfortable with a role and lean them into the conversation, as opposed to, as you said, sometimes they think, well, I don't know that I have the experience for that, but you do have the experience, certainly, and the expertise for the how.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You should be the deepest visionary and strategist on the how.
Yes.
You can have a sales guy person, a R&D person, an operations person, finance person. Oh yeah, we're going to blah 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 in 3 years, and we're going to get sales up. Yeah, how the heck are you going to do that? Because guess what? The future is going to be software based, and we're hardware, or the future is going to be hardware, and we don't know squat about hardware. And oh, I'm going to hire people. Really? And so the CHRO then, again, speaking up, being confident about their role and about their expertise, leaning into it, as you said, Karen, and helping the CEO and the team hold themselves accountable to finding and figuring out the how. That's really important.
I think every CEO who sees this is going to be like, oh, I can't wait for my CHRO to do the how. Please let them take over the how.
But Cindy, you said it earlier in the conversation where you talked about delegation or accountability or something, or maybe Karen, you brought it up early in your career. People ask you to go, you do that, the how. I would, if I was a CHRO, I'd say, no, I'm not going to do the how, because you, leader of this function, you leader of that function, you're going to do the how. I'm going to be your how enabler.
How enabler.
I'm
Okay.
going to lead the conversation on the how. I'm going to lead the plan on the how, but I'm not going to execute alone the how, is how I would think about it. But it is making sure that because so often that conversation gets dropped, and then 18 months later, it's like, well, why aren't we further?
Right.
Okay, I think we have a new tagline.
On the how. Right.
Yeah, we have a new tagline, the how enabler. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like yes, there you go. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. Like, this is like coaching that I crave. And I guess if any of our audience is interested in getting in on some of this amazing coaching, feel free to reach out to Susan Madonia. We'll drop her contact information into the show notes. And thank you, Susan, ECC, as well as Ariel, for continuing support of our Big HR event as well each year. So any closing words, Susan?
No, just that I think there was some secret sauce here on the CEO, Chief Human Resource Officer relationship. I hope everybody enjoyed.
Yeah, some really awesome golden nuggets.
All
right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Hold on.